I want to be upfront about something before I start. My husband walked into that conference room on a Thursday afternoon in November, and within the hour, his sister had been removed from every project she'd ever claimed as her own. But that's not where the story begins. The story begins the way most stories about disappearing do, slowly, quietly, one small erasure at a time. Let me tell you what really happened. My name is Elena. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia, 3 years of project management experience at one of the top real estate development firms in Chicago, and a portfolio of residential builds that won regional design awards 2 years in a row. I say all of this not to impress you, but because I need you to understand what I brought into that family, what I brought into that company, and how little of it they ever acknowledged. When I married my husband 2 years ago, his mother pulled me aside at the reception and said, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, that she was so happy her son had found someone so charming, not capable, not accomplished, charming, like I was a decorative piece he'd picked up somewhere and brought home. I should have paid closer attention to that word. My husband's family owns Hargrove Properties, a mid-sized real estate development company based in Atlanta that handles residential and mixed-use builds across the Southeast. His sister has been running day-to-day operations for the past 4 years. She's sharp, well-dressed, and extraordinarily good at making other people's ideas sound like her own. I figured that out in my first 2 weeks on the job. It took me another 18 months to decide to do something about it. The first morning I walked into the Hargrove Properties office, I brought my portfolio binder, my laptop, and a clean notebook. I was ready. I'd spent the week before reading through their active project files, flagging inefficiencies in their permitting timelines, and drafting a preliminary framework for a mixed-use development proposal my husband had mentioned they were struggling to move forward. My sister-in-law looked at the binder, then looked at me and said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. We've needed someone to take ownership of the welcome desk and coordinate catering for client visits. It's a small thing, but it really sets the tone, you know?" I blinked. I smiled. I said, "Of course." I did not touch the welcome desk. I set up my laptop 3 offices down from hers and started pulling the permitting files. Nobody stopped me. Nobody helped me either. By the end of the first week, I had a revised timeline for the Meridian Street project that shaved 6 weeks off their projected completion date. I sent it to my sister-in-law with a brief explanation. She forwarded it to the project lead without my name attached and CC'd the clients. The response from the clients was glowing. My sister-in-law replied to their email thread and wrote, "Thank you, I've been reworking this approach for a while, and I'm glad it's landing well." I stared at my screen for a long time after that. There's a moment when you first realize what's happening, and your brain just refuses to accept it. You tell yourself there was a misunderstanding. You tell yourself it was accidental. You make excuses for the person who's taking from you, because making excuses is so much easier than accepting that someone in your own family has quietly decided you don't matter. I made excuses for about 3 weeks. Then the Caldwell Towers proposal happened. Caldwell Towers was the biggest project on Hargrove's plate, a 12-story mixed-use development downtown, with retail on the ground floor, office space in the middle, and luxury residences on top. The client was a private equity group out of Dallas called Bridgemark Capital, the kind of clients who flew in on their own planes and expected everything to be perfect before they even sat down. My sister-in-law had been fumbling the proposal for months. The phasing plan didn't account for Atlanta's zoning variance requirements. The cost projections were based on pre-inflation materials data that was already 18 months old. The design concept was fine aesthetically, but it had structural staging issues that would have caused massive delays during construction. I stayed late 3 nights in a row and rebuilt the entire proposal. Not tweaked it, rebuilt it. New phasing structure, updated cost matrix, revised design staging with a realistic buffer schedule built in. I documented every change I made with timestamps in the shared drive. I emailed my sister-in-law at 11:30 on a Wednesday night with the full revised package attached and a clear subject line, Caldwell Towers full proposal revision. She read it. I could see the read receipt. She did not reply. The following Monday, she walked into the Bridgemark Capital pre-meeting with a printed deck. I watched her flip through it as people settled into their seats. Page 1. Page 2. The phasing plan I had built. The cost matrix I had researched. The staging structure I had engineered. My name was nowhere in the document. I sat at the far end of the conference table, in a chair slightly outside the main cluster. The way you sit when someone has not saved you a real seat. One of the junior associates from Bridgemark glanced at me and asked, Are you part of the Hargrove team? Before I could answer, my sister-in-law said brightly, Elena is my brother's wife. She's been getting familiar with how we do things here. She paused just long enough to let that land. It's been a learning experience for her. Two of the associates exchanged a look. The kind of look that says they heard exactly what was said, and exactly what was meant. I smiled. I said nothing. That night I drove home in silence. My husband was already there, making dinner, asking how the meeting went. I said it went fine. He looked at me the way people look at you when they know something is wrong but aren't sure if you want to talk about it yet. He asked again, quieter this time. I told him the outline. Not everything, just enough. He set down the spatula. He didn't explode, didn't demand to call his sister right then. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Tell me what you need. I said I needed to handle it myself. He nodded. He said, I know you can. That was the night I started the folder. I named it simply, Record. A gray generic icon sitting on my desktop, completely unremarkable. Inside it, every email, every version history, every time-stamped document, screenshots of the shared drive showing when files were last modified and by whom, the original proposal files with my metadata still embedded. I started forwarding copies of my own work to a personal email account every time I finished something. No explanation in the body of the email, just the attachment, just the date. I started carrying a small notebook everywhere, not for to-do lists, for documentation. Who said what? To whom? In front of how many people? Time? Location? Exact words where I could remember them. People thought I was taking meeting notes. I was, in a way. There was a woman named Patricia who worked in the legal compliance office. She had been with Hargrove for 12 years. She was in her late 50s, meticulous, and almost always the quietest person in any room. She noticed things. I could tell by the way her eyes moved when my sister-in-law spoke, taking stock, cataloging, filing away. She never said anything to me directly. Not at first. But one afternoon in early October, I found a sticky note on my keyboard when I came back from lunch. It said only, check the metadata on the Q3 project summary before it goes to the board. Unsigned. I checked. My name had been stripped from the document properties. Someone had resaved it under a different author profile. I restored the original version from the version history, took a screenshot with the timestamp, and added it to the folder. I wrote a thank you note on a sticky note and left it on Patricia's desk. She walked past my office an hour later and gave me a single nod. That was all either of us said about it for weeks. Meanwhile, the pattern kept going. I would develop something, a client analysis, a zoning variance strategy, a cost reduction framework, and within days it would appear in a presentation or a client email under someone else's name. Usually my sister-in-law's, occasionally a junior associate she was grooming. I stopped reacting visibly. I kept building the folder. In October, my mother-in-law started coming to the office more frequently. She didn't have an official role, but she was a founding partner, and she carried that weight everywhere she went. She had a way of walking into a room that made everyone sit up straighter. She sat in on the Caldwell Towers update meeting and watched my sister-in-law lead the whole thing using frameworks I had built. She smiled through the entire meeting. After it ended, she walked past my desk and said, You look like you're settling in nicely, dear. She did not ask about the work. She did not ask about the project. She said settling in, like I was a piece of furniture finding its place. That evening, I overheard a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. I was working late again, a habit now, almost a ritual, and the office had emptied out. My sister-in-law's door was half open. Her voice carried. She's not going to be a problem, she said, confident and flat. She thinks she's being strategic. She doesn't understand that this isn't her house. A pause. I know. But she's Marcus's wife, which means we have to be careful. Just keep her busy with the smaller files. Visible enough that he doesn't ask questions. Invisible enough that she doesn't matter. I sat very still at my desk. My hands were in my lap. I was not angry. I was not shaking. I felt strangely, like something had just crystallized, like a blurry image finally snapping into focus. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a culture problem. This was architecture, a system, deliberately built, designed to make sure I never accumulated enough credibility to threaten what she had built. I picked up my phone, opened the voice memo app, and set it face down on the edge of my desk. Still recording. She said 3 more things before she ended the call. I won't list them all. But when I played the recording back later that night, sitting on my bathroom floor with the door locked, I understood that I had been exactly right to start the folder when I did. That was the night the folder became a case. I reached out to a contact I'd kept from my time in Chicago, a woman who specialized in intellectual property disputes in corporate environments. I sent her the full documentation package without a cover letter, just the subject line: evidence of systematic work attribution fraud, internal corporate context. She responded within 48 hours. November arrived with a cold snap that caught Atlanta off guard. The Caldwell Towers final presentation was scheduled for the 15th. This was the big one, Bridgemark Capital's full investment board, flying in from Dallas and New York, expecting a complete development roadmap. The presentation that would determine whether Hargrove got the full contract or lost it to the competing firm that had been circling for months. My sister-in-law had been preparing for weeks. Or rather, she had been preparing to present what I had been building for weeks. The full Caldwell Towers packaged the site analysis, the phasing model, the financial projections, the community impact summary, was almost entirely my work. I knew it. Patricia knew it. And I was fairly certain that somewhere in the version history, the documentation knew it too. The morning of the 15th, I came in earlier than everyone else. I made coffee. I sat at my desk and reviewed the folder one last time. 18 documents, 47 screenshots, 2 audio recordings, a chain of emails spanning 3 months, the metadata from 9 separate project files. I put everything on a flash drive and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer. At 9:15, the Bridgemark board began arriving. 6 people, tailored suits, firm handshakes, the particular kind of polite efficiency that signals they had other meetings after this one, and planned to be on time for all of them. My sister-in-law met them at the elevator, my mother-in-law just behind her, both of them projecting the easy confidence of people who own the room they're standing in. I was standing near the windows. One of the Bridgemark board members, a woman named Diana, who I recognized from the firm's public filings, as their head of acquisitions, looked at me and asked, "Are you presenting today?" My sister-in-law stepped smoothly between us. Elena handles some of our internal coordination. She's been observing our process. She touched Diana's arm lightly to steer her toward the conference room. "Shall we get started?" I watched them file in. I counted to 5. Then I walked in and took a seat at the table. Not at the edge, at the table. Nobody said anything. The presentation began. My sister-in-law moved through the slides with the practiced ease of someone who had memorized the work without having written a word of it. The phasing model, the cost projections, the design staging, the community partnership strategy I had spent 2 weekends developing. She spoke about each section as though she had lived inside it, and in a way, she had just not by doing the work. About halfway through, Diana from Bridgemark asked a specific question about the zoning variance buffer built into the Phase 2 timeline. It was a technical question, detailed, the kind of question you could only answer if you understood not just what the buffer was, but why it had been designed that way, what contingency scenarios it accounted for, what Atlanta zoning precedents it was built around. My sister-in-law paused. A small pause, barely visible, but I saw it. She began an answer that was technically adjacent to correct, but missing the core reasoning. I spoke. The buffer accounts for 2 specific variance categories that Atlanta's Planning Commission has been flagging on mixed-use projects in that district since 2021, I said calmly, addressing Diana directly. If we hit a secondary variance review, which is likely given the retail footprint the 8-week buffer absorbs that without pushing the residential completion date, I built that in specifically because of a precedent on the Ponce City extension. I have the Planning Commission documentation if you want to see it. The room was quiet. Diana looked at me, then at my sister-in-law, then back at me. "You built this section?" "I built the proposal," I said. "The full proposal." My sister-in-law laughed a short, practiced laugh. Elena has been involved in reviewing some of the materials, of course. But the strategic vision here, I have the original files, I said, not loudly, evenly, time-stamped, with version history. If there's any question about authorship, I can pull them up right now. Silence. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was seated against the far wall. She was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger. Something more complicated than that. Then the door opened. My husband walked in. He wasn't dressed the way he usually dressed for office days, open collar, relaxed jacket. He was in a dark suit. And he was not alone. Behind him came 2 men I didn't recognize, both carrying document folders, and behind them, A woman in a gray blazer who I had spoken to on the phone twice in the past month, the attorney. My sister-in-law's expression flickered. Marcus, we're in the middle of a client presentation. He looked at her steadily. I know. He nodded to the Bridgemark board. I apologize for the interruption. My name is Marcus Hargrove. I'm a principal at this firm and I have some information relevant to this meeting. He set a folder on the table. Over the past several weeks, he said, I've been working with an outside auditor to review our internal project documentation. What that review found is that the Caldwell Towers proposal, the methodology behind it, and the majority of Hargrove's project frameworks from the last 8 months were originated and developed by one person. He looked at me. My wife, my sister-in-law, stood up. This is not the place. I have the metadata, the attorney said, opening her folder. I have the original document creation timestamps. I have email records and version histories. I have audio documentation of internal conversations describing a deliberate pattern of attribution suppression. Diana from Bridgemark was very still. I also want to be clear, my husband continued, that this is not a personal matter being brought into a professional space. This is a professional matter that was allowed to exist because of personal assumptions, specifically the assumption that my wife's contributions could be absorbed into this firm without consequence because of her relationship to me. He paused. That assumption was wrong. Patricia was seated near the back of the room. She had slipped in at some point, and I hadn't noticed. She was holding a printed document, the Q3 project summary. I realized, with the restored metadata. She set it on the table in front of the Bridgemark board without a word. My sister-in-law looked at our mother. Are you going to say something? My mother-in-law was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, quietly and without looking up, I think we've said enough. The Bridgemark meeting wrapped with a precision that felt almost clinical. Diana requested a 24-hour pause while their board reviewed the documentation package the attorney had compiled. She shook my hand before she left firmly, directly, and said, We look forward to continuing this conversation with you. With me. Not with the firm. With me. The rest of the day moved in a kind of suspended stillness. My sister-in-law left the office by noon. She didn't say anything when she walked past my desk. She didn't look at me. My mother-in-law sat in the corner conference room for a while, alone, and I made no attempt to go in. My husband found me at my desk around 3 o'clock. He sat on the edge of it, the way he used to sit on the edge of our kitchen counter when we were first dating, and he'd come over while I was finishing work. He asked if I was all right. I thought about it honestly. I said yes, and I meant it. But it was a complicated yes, the kind that carries the weight of everything that had built up before it could be said. He told me that he'd known something was wrong for longer than I had told him. He'd started asking questions on his own, quietly, without telling me. He didn't want to take it away from me, he said. He knew I needed to be the one to do it. I told him that was exactly right, and that I was glad he understood. He didn't apologize on behalf of his family. He didn't try to explain them or soften what they'd done. He said, simply, they were wrong, and you didn't shrink. We sat there for a while without talking. In the weeks that followed, my sister-in-law stepped back from her operational role pending an internal review. The review was thorough. Patricia had apparently been keeping documentation of her own for considerably longer than I had been keeping mine, which told me something about how long this pattern had been in place. Bridgemark Capital moved forward with the Caldwell Towers contract. The project lead listed in the agreement was my name. My mother-in-law and I had one real conversation about all of it, about 3 weeks after the conference room. She came to my office, knocked, and sat down across from me without being invited. She looked older than she had a month ago, or maybe I was just seeing her differently. She said she had always thought of me as an extension of her son, not as a professional in my own right. She said that was a failure of perception. Not intention, though. She acknowledged that the distinction might not matter much from where I was sitting. I told her she was right, that the distinction didn't change the impact, but I appreciated her saying it. She looked around the office for a moment. At my degrees on the wall, my project boards, the Caldwell Towers timeline pinned up in the corner. She said, You built something here. I said yes, I did. She nodded once and stood up to leave. At the door, she paused. My daughter is very talented, she said, and I could hear the genuine grief underneath it. But she learned to take shortcuts from watching people who should have known better. She didn't say who those people were. She didn't have to. After she left, I sat quietly for a while. I thought about the night I sat on my bathroom floor with my phone playing back a recording I hadn't planned to make. I thought about the folder I started building not out of revenge, but out of a refusal to be erased. I thought about Patricia's sticky note on my keyboard, the smallest possible gesture of solidarity from someone who had seen enough to know it mattered. The Caldwell Tower's groundbreaking was set for the following spring. I was invited to speak at it, not as someone's wife, not as someone who had helped with coordination, as the project lead, as the person who had built the proposal from the ground up and seen it through. I stood in front of that building site on a cool March morning, looking at the footprint of something that would eventually be 12 stories tall, and I thought about everything that had happened to get me to that moment. Not the conference room drama that was just 1 hour of a much longer story. The real story was all the nights I stayed late, all the work I quietly did while someone else took credit for it, all the documentation I built without knowing exactly when or how it would matter. I had not set out to destroy anyone. I set out to be seen. And if there is one thing I know now that I didn't fully understand when I walked into that office with my portfolio binder and my clean notebook, it's this. You can survive being made invisible for a while, but you cannot survive deciding to stay that way. The moment I started writing things down, I stopped disappearing. The bricks for the Caldwell Towers foundation were laid on a Tuesday. I wore my good blazer. I shook hands with the Bridgemark board. Diana told me she'd already flagged my work to 2 colleagues developing a similar project in Charlotte. On the drive home, I called my husband. He picked up before the second ring. I told him about Charlotte. He laughed a full, genuine, uncomplicated laugh and said, "Of course." I rolled down the window. The Atlanta air was warmer than it should have been for March. I let myself feel the satisfaction of that, plainly, without managing it or tempering it or waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had spent too long making myself small to fit inside someone else's idea of what I was supposed to be here. I was done fitting. So if you're watching this and you know what it feels like to sit at the edge of your own life, while someone else takes credit for the center of it, I want you to hear me when I say, it doesn't have to stay that way. Not because someone is going to walk in and fix it for you, but because you are already more capable than the space they've allowed you than you know. Start writing things down. Start sending yourself your own work. Start standing in rooms where you belong and refusing to scoot to the edge. You don't need to destroy anyone to reclaim what's yours. You just need to stop letting them take it without record. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight to be seen somewhere you already deserve to be? I want to hear it. And if this story found you when you needed it, subscribe to the channel. There are more of these coming. Real ones. Honest ones. For everyone who is still standing their ground in silence, getting ready to speak.